Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. We're back after a rather lengthy hiatus. I mean, if this is the year 2763, you won't be aware of the hiatus, but some of you have been asking what's happening, and we're back. I'm just very happy for that, and I apologize for the delay, but I had to move and get organized, and it's been a whole rigmarole. And this is a major project, and I want to do it right. So I hope you will indulge my lack of promptitude in coming up with number 49, which is a major Haydn symphony. This is one of the jewels of the Sturm und Drang period, the storm and stress full of angst and emotional turmoil and tumult and all of that stuff. The key is F minor. F minor is Haydn's personal minor key. You know, lots of composers have personal minor keys. Beethoven had C minor, Mozart had G minor. Well, Haydn was F minor, and he always uses, when he's writing in F minor, and there's a text, you know, there's words, the words are always about loneliness, isolation, abandonment, desolation. It's really rather fascinating because it's completely consistent in his work. Even the Farewell Symphony is an F sharp minor, which is a sort of modification of F minor. And it's about leaving. It's about going away. And that was Haydn's association with this key. So I'm not quite sure why the Passion got there, other than, there was just a tendency to attach things of deep religious significance to music that was deep and sometimes religious sounding. I mean, Haydn often wrote music that was religious or spiritual in content. So it's not as crazy as it sounds, but there's no real connection between the Passion story and this music. It doesn't quote Gregorian chants in any sort of major way. It actually is rather fascinatingly constructed, but this is Haydn's last symphony in church sonata form. That means with a big opening slow movement. It was called a church sonata just because there were, in the ideal church sonata, church mode, not this symphony, there were no dance movements. The idea was, the emphasis was always on slow movements and in quick movements, counterpoint, fugue, things that were learned and did not distract the attention from sacred and higher things as a dance would. This symphony, of course, has a minuet as its third movement, so it's not a pure church type piece. You find more of those in the Baroque period, but as always with music, we have the definition and then we have reality. And reality is whatever the composer did. And the composers tend to do whatever they did to make the music interesting. And if that meant throw in a dance movement, they threw in a dance movement. That's why the church authorities were always so irritated with the presence of instrumental music, particularly in church, because they felt that it was inherently, not sacred. It was secular, as really it was. Let's face it. People enjoyed it. It was there to be enjoyed, and you weren't supposed to enjoy yourself when you were in church. You were supposed to be miserable. And so there you go. Anyway, again, we're coming back to that because this is important. This is an important point we're making because this is Haydn's last church sonata symphony, and we don't need a lot of musical examples to describe it. But I do want to speculate a little bit about why it was that Haydn stopped writing these types of symphonies. And indeed, as we get into the 50s, which we will after this for the next few symphonies, Haydn's Sturm und Drang period is going to draw to a close completely. And he's going to start turning his attention to other things. Now, he never gave up what he learned from this particular style, this phase in his career. It's defined by a sequence of works in minor keys, intense, brooding works. If you hear the noise, the cats are doing their morning ritual. I wish I could show them to you, but one of them's right here, Finster, and Mildred's in the other room, but I don't interrupt them when they're hunting. It's a big mistake. I have the scratches here to prove it. So I know they're only 5 months old and they're still a little crazy. Anyway, where were we? Oh, yes, the church sonata thing. Haydn never gave up what he learned in the Sturm und Drang period, as I was saying. He simply embraced it as part of a wider range of style, as part of a larger project. And this is the symphony that shows you why. It really does. It's an incredibly intense piece. It's his darkest church sonata symphony, one of his darkest Sturm und Drang symphonies. I mean, as befits the key of F minor. It's a unique moment of concentrated intensity on one idea, typified by the key of F minor, one key, because the entire symphony is homotonal. Isn't that a wonderful word, homotonal? It is a homotonal symphony, not to be confused with a homoerotic symphony or a homo sapien symphony or a homeopathic symphony or any of those other things. No, it is homotonal. That means it's in one key. That key is F minor. And so the example that I have prepared for you contains the openings of all four movements, one after the other. Just the first few seconds of each, it's the whole thing is like less than a minute, so that you can get a sense of what it's like to stay in this sort of dark, oppressive key of F minor for 20 plus minutes. I mean, if you take all the repeats, it's even longer, 25 or so minutes, and every movement ends in F minor, the key that it began in, which is rare. In the classical period, usually something that begins in the minor ends in a happy major key. Mozart is a big exception. He almost always ended back in the minor key in which he began. That's one of the things that gives Mozart the impression of having such great depth and sadness, even though he died young and, because his life was tragic and, it's all that stuff just all fits together somehow, right? He was miserable. He died. He was sad. He ends sadly. It's all sad, And then, so this is one of those symphonies, one of those that ends in the minor key. And it's oppressive. It's oppressive. I mean, it's one of the darkest pieces until like Mahler's Sixth Symphony, something that also does, that's all grouped around the key, more or less, of A minor. Wherever it starts to get happy, it goes back into darkness. Well, that's what this symphony does. It's sort of a prototypical example. So I'm going to play you, thanks to Naxos and the Northern Chamber Orchestra under Nicholas Ward. This is a very good performance, by the way. All four movements in sequence without a break. Just listen to them. They're very well contrasted. And one of the things I want you to pay attention to when you listen to this example is it's not just the fact that everything is in F minor that sort of binds the whole work together. The opening idea of the slow movement is do, 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 do. It's this sort of flowing sad melody in even notes. That gets picked up more or less in each ensuing movement. In fact, Haydn treats that opening line, if he were an atonal composer, you could almost call it a tone row, because he manipulates this concept of just this oscillating minor key thing in even notes. In the second movement, it's really nutty, because you've got this crazy bass line, and the melody is insane. It's blah, 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 oh, it's just this nutty, big, huge leaps and screams and, very, very crazy. The minuet is a stately, dark dance of death, Toten Tanz. And the finale is just exciting and passionate and turbulent. But it all seems to be based somehow in the idea of the opening adagio, and exactly how doesn't really matter, because it's all going to be in F minor anyway. It's very easy to create connections between things without having to quote literally, which Haydn very seldom does. So let's listen to all four movements in a row, the openings of each, and you'll hear this in a nutshell, the intense F minorosity, of the entire work. You're ready? Here we go. See what I mean? That F minor liciousness, that permeates the work. That's what gives it its unique intensity. And this teaches us something very important. And it also tells us something about why Haydn probably was soon to give up this style. He gave up this structure with this symphony, but also the Sturm und Drang style in general, that focus on single things, that single-mindedness of his music. First of all, Haydn was always a great lover of contrast and variety. That's what his style was about. The widest possible contrast in the smallest possible space. This is not that kind of a work. Oh, wait a minute. We're going to have an episode. There we go. This is Finster. Say, all right, I'm putting you down. I'm putting you down now. I know. She doesn't like it. She's very young. So you just don't jump on my computer, please. I'm going to have a disaster there. Okay, so now that you've met Finster before, Mildred, I'll never get my hands on. Mildred is a total spaz. You stay down there. Thank you. Okay, so anyway, where were we? Oh, yeah, we were talking about F minorosity. Haydn was such a fan of big contrasts, and his symphonic project was incorporating the widest range of emotion and expression into, like I said, a very small space, but also making these things cohere in a powerful and expressive way, because the more they cohere, the more powerful and convincing the expression is going to be. I don't think that's a controversial position. A piece like this, which is entirely in the key of F minor, tells us something about negative emotion in music, which I think is very interesting, which is it's really very easy to be tragic. It's very easy to be sad. It's very easy to be dark. All you do is pick your minor key and sit on it. You just stick with it for a long time. And that's all you need to do. And you will have misery. It's really pretty straightforward. Haydn shows us right here. That's all you need to do. Now, it's a powerful work. It's a beautiful work. We tend to associate minor keys with greater depth. I don't know why we do that. I think the greater depth comes from the fact that minor keys are more unstable, and because the sadness acts in contrast to, happiness or other sorts of emotions. And so we tend to like that. But I'm not sure. It bothers me, actually, that we value misery so highly, that we think something that's tragic is somehow deeper and more profound than something which is happy. Granted, it's very difficult to be happy without being merely facile or bland, just pleasant. But Haydn's whole symphonic program was to be profoundly happy, to create a depth to joy which was as deep as the depth of sorrow that we hear in this particular symphony. And he succeeded in that. And that's why, I believe, he didn't stay on this path for much longer. Actually, Haydn never repeated himself anyway. He wasn't going to write a dozen Passione symphonies. It just wasn't his thing. It wasn't the way he thought. He always wanted to be new and fresh and evolutionary and developmental and moving on to something different. So this was a moment, this symphony. It really was. It's a moment of uniqueness. And I like I said, I am completely, sort of put off by the fact that we think it's better to be dismal. That's why Mozart is considered profound, because he often ends in minor keys, because he was often dismal. The same thing is true of Schubert. Now, it's not that they're not profound. They are. And that their sadness isn't genuine. It is. It's tremendously impressive and very, very beautiful. And I understand all of those things. But we shouldn't value that at the price of not recognizing the equally deep opposite side of things for those composers who knew how to express it. Beethoven knew how to express it. Haydn knew how to express it. Some did, some didn't. And this is a wonderful exemplar, a way to get us thinking about that entire concept. I personally think that the deification of misery is a Christian thing. And I'm not saying that to criticize Christianity. I'm saying it because you find, for example, the title of this very symphony, La Passione. Why is it called that? Because it's uniquely dark. because the story of the Passion is horrifying, because you have one of the world's great faiths based on what was a horrifying murder and torture. And so the evocation of that horrifying murder and torture, which necessarily entails, of course, the resurrection and redemption and salvation and all of that stuff that comes later, there is a tendency, I think, to place a greater value on the darker side, because it's a very dark thing, the story of Jesus. And Haydn was taken to task by church authorities because his music was considered too cheerful, and cheerful was bad. And if you think the Catholics had a problem, wait till you get to the Lutherans and Bach, who celebrate misery in all of its forms. I mean, that trend, that it became part of Western culture, Western civilization. Whether you agree with it or not isn't really relevant. It's just there. And you suck it up and deal with it. But I can't help, not being a member of that faith, to be puzzled and somewhat, when it comes to music, dismayed at the knee-jerk reaction that something which is tragic, something which is dismal and sad, always has to be better, because it's deeper, because it's more profound, because suffering is somehow, elementally more true or more real. It could be that most of us are just miserable, underneath the facade of cheer. I don't know. Haydn was not that way. And I hope that most of you are not that way. And I hope that this symphony gives you an opportunity to consider some of the undercurrents, the aesthetic undercurrents that lead us to value music the way we do, and most importantly, to undervalue Haydn. I mean, when you hear a symphony like La Passione, people undervalue Haydn in this way. They say, oh, he wrote this deep, dark, passionate symphony. Why didn't he do more? Like he had some obligation to do more when he did other things that he was supremely great at? I mean, is it always better to be as miserable as possible, or to be miserable with a certain frequency, which is undefined? I don't know. I just think it's all kind of crazy. And I love this symphony, but I think we should recognize it for what it is, appreciate it and enjoy it for what it is, and then get ready to move on to an entirely different realm of musical expression. So keep on listening, friends. Thank you for joining me. Take care.